Cool. So I'll get us started off. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar, Unlock the Scale, Security, and Compliance of the Cloud. Before we get started, I would just like to go over a few housekeeping items. So first, everybody is muted and your video is off, but if you'd like to ask any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature or wait until the Q&A portion of the presentation, and I can unmute you if you'd like. Next, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you afterwards, so you'll have access to the recording and the deck. And lastly, if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email solutions@dyopath.com with your questions, and we will get them directed to the right person. So getting started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Matt Briggs, our Director of New Business Development. Shortly, Jesse Alexander will be joining us, and he is our DYOPATH Chief Revenue Officer. And today we have a guest speaker from Green Cloud. His name is Mac McClenathan, who is the National Development Director for Green Cloud. And from here, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Use my version if you want to give me the ability to do that.
Sure, give me one.
And while Jordan's doing that, so good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, everyone. Thanks for joining Mac and I for another webinar session. So today, what we want to focus on is how organizations can really take full advantage of built-in scale, security, and compliance that the cloud has to offer. And at DYOPATH, we certainly want your move to the cloud to be successful, to be cost-effective, and certainly purposeful, right? Driven by business or organizational requirements. If the proper assessing and planning and migration strategy, testing, optimization, ongoing support occurs, then as I think you guys are fully aware, cloud computing can quickly allow technology to become very effective in supporting an organization's goals and objectives. However, we have had plenty of organizations that needed help recovering from incomplete, botched, shaky efforts of moving to the cloud, or once in the cloud, there's been challenges with things like security, day-to-day support, and things like that. So we certainly don't want you guys to fall into that category. So Mac, that being said, before we dive into the agenda, anything top of mind for you?
I've got plenty of examples of migrations gone bad, but we'll dig into a little bit more, I think maybe on the tool set strategy and what's important to look for here later in the presentation for sure.
Okay, thanks. All right. Everyone see that okay? Am I sharing?
We can see your browser, but we cannot see any decks yet.
Okay. All right. Bear with me. Jordan, why don't you go ahead and keep sharing, and we'll.
Sounds good. Just give me one moment to pull it back up.
Yeah. So in our agenda today, we'll provide you with a very brief overview, I promise, of DYOPATH for those of you that are unfamiliar, uninitiated. We'll certainly discuss our webinar objectives, and then we'll dig into the meat of the presentation. Really, it's cloud defined. It's why migrate, what the value is of migrating, how to move successfully, ongoing considerations, including security. And then, we wanted to call out some missteps as well. And lastly, I think we'll end with a case study to, give you an example of what I would call a classic use case of harnessing the full power of the cloud and quickly. So Jordan, if you want to progress. I'd appreciate it. So, just quickly in regard to who, DYOPATH is, we've been in the IT outsourcing business for 25 years now, co-headquartered in Houston and Chicago. We're around about 700 employees, which makes us one of the largest privately held MSPs and MSSPs in the country. The organizations that we work with are a mix of, primarily mid-market and enterprise in the commercial sector, spanning about 14 different verticals. And then we've got a public sector practice that's focused on education, on federal, on state and local government as well. We've got a broad and deep bench of technical resources that reside in our service centers, in our NOC, in our security operations center. Certainly have an abundance of resources within the field as well. So I think we have a presence in 23, 24 different states, a few different U.S. territories, and a few different countries. We've got robust on-site dispatch capabilities, and we've tried to align to a few different frameworks. So from an operational perspective, ITIL, we're very much data-driven and metric-driven. SOC 2 Type 2, ISO, HIPAA. So some of those more broader reaching operational and controls frameworks. And then a fun fact on us is we're secret and top secret cleared with the U.S. government in certain instances because of agreements that we hold with some of the agencies we're going to talk about in a little bit. So, as far as our security practice, Jordan, if you want to advance a slide, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about security, because IT in general, right? Security permeates everything that's IT related, including cloud. So we've been an advanced cybersecurity solutions provider for 20 years. We have a 24/7 US-based SOC, used to supporting highly regulated organizations, clients. We've done some very unique unique work in the federal space as it relates to supporting Department of Justice assets, Homeland Security, and EMR records. And we currently run a sensitive program for Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority. And we have co-authored a controls framework for the energy sector called NERC-CIP. So we've certainly got some pedigree in security. Jordan, if you want to move ahead. As many of you do know, DYOPATH has a comprehensive suite of services. Our 7 pillars are advanced security, connectivity, education, IT outsourcing, managed services, professional services, and consulting. And then, as it relates to cloud, we can provide cloud readiness, cloud migration, cloud optimization, security around that. We've spun up in partnership with Mac and his team, our own private cloud, and then we're also experts in public hyperscalers like AWS or Azure. And then, lastly, we've provided a whole host of support services for cloud-based assets and solutions through our service desk and our network operations center. So that's it on the commercial for DYOPATH. So if you want to move ahead, as far as the objectives, our goals are really a few. So we want to educate on cloud. We want to explain our methodology as it relates to planning, migration, and support. We would like to identify pitfalls and common mistakes. So if we call those out, hopefully you won't fall into some of the traps that we've seen in the past. And we want to set you up to fully embrace the advantages of the cloud, including scale, security, and compliance. And Jesse, welcome along. Okay, so if we move ahead, Jordan, if we take a look at DYOPATH's client engagement model, I wanted to bring this up because there's a lot of similarities in our value proposition and the advantages that are inherent in the cloud. So DYOPATH has built services and solutions over the last 25 years and longer to take care of tactical, mundane, day-to-day IT tasks. We remove those from your plate so that you can focus on higher value objectives that the organization needs you to focus on. Honestly, the same can be said for cloud service providers, that we partner with, or cloud solutions that we offer, right? So infrastructure, platform, or software as a service. CSPs have built their offerings so that you don't have to go through the rigmarole of doing that. So I'll pause. Mac, Jesse, anything to add here before we move on? Okay. So Jordan, if you can advance, but before we talk about how to migrate to the cloud or support or secure the cloud environment for that matter, I thought it'd be beneficial just to define cloud, because it is pretty nebulous, broad-reaching. It causes some confusion in the marketplace as well. So I think Microsoft has a pretty elegant definition. And so I'll just read this out. Simply put, cloud computing is the delivery of computer services, including servers, storage, databases, networking, software, analytics, and intelligence over the internet to offer faster innovation and flexible resources and economies of scale. So I love that definition. I think it kind of cuts to the chase and hits the nail on the head. So if you look at this diagram of the cloud, in my opinion, and we're showing that here, the picture becomes even clearer. As far as deployment models are concerned, there are several options. As you know, an organization can have their own dedicated cloud environment where nothing is shared. An organization can elect a community cloud, essentially a collaborative effort whereby infrastructure is shared between several organizations with common concerns. And there is most certainly the option to move to public cloud. We're seeing that become more and more common every day, where compute, database, storage, infrastructure is all shared. And now there's even not only hybrid, but multi-public cloud approaches, so that not all of an organization's eggs are in one basket. So we'll get into the delivery models or examples in the next few slides, but know the cloud can be delivered as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or as straight software as a service. And then we can talk about the characteristics and advantages of cloud in a little bit as we move through the presentation. So Mac, Jesse, any thoughts here?
You got it just fine there.
Okay. All right. So, so these tables are for illustrative purposes. I would say the more popular IaaS offerings that would likely come to mind for you guys are Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, GCP, Google Cloud. So I think that, and we'll get into security and roles and responsibilities, but in some cases, when it comes to looking at environmentals, equipment refresh, making resources and applications and systems available to folks that are scattered wherever, IaaS might be the right option. If we shift to platform as a service, the example that I like most is Force.com, right? So Force.com has created a platform, really a product to simplify development and deployment of cloud-based apps. And Salesforce.com is a perfect example of a CRM that leverages Force.com as their platform. So, and by the way, if there's any questions, certainly please let the panelists know as we forge ahead. So in looking at the next slide, there's certainly a multitude of reasons why moving to cloud makes a whole lot of sense. If you look at mobility and work from home, work from really anywhere as a primary driver, server systems, applications are centralized in an environment that's built to support many users from any device and anywhere. And obviously we've seen, the proliferation of, cloud first, cloud only, starting in March of 2020, organizations that were more in a traditional infrastructure setting were kicked into gear from that standpoint as folks had to go and work from home. Migrating to cloud providers also has an advantage because there may be requisite certifications, governance and regulatory compliance that you need to check off with clients, with partners, with insurance providers. Things like SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, NIST 800, 151 or 171, FedRAMP. So you can tap into instant regulatory compliance if you plot out a move to the right type of cloud service provider. Certainly security. There's some values of both the physical and the cyber front. Depending on what deployment model you're looking at. The environmentals are all there. Typically service providers are in multiple geographies. So everything's highly available. They're served by multiple power grids. Everything's backed up. Elasticity, right? So one of the key points of this presentation is scale, and so leveraging cloud if you have maybe seasonality or there's cyclical demand in your products or services, and you need to ramp up quickly and sort of pay by the drink, as it were. So cloud allows you to flex up and then retrench at the same time if you need to, and that would be reflected in invoicing. So those are a few different reasons that cloud makes a lot of sense. And then even from an administrative perspective, I think it streamlines and it simplifies things on the support side. So Mac.
Yeah, one thing I would say that's not on this list that we run into a lot just as a cloud provider is, and I actually think this is kind of lends itself to the cybersecurity outsourcing space as well, but just the general lack of skills in the market right now. I guess, what would you call it? Negative unemployment in both some of these traditional, infrastructure skill sets, infrastructure management skill sets, as well as, the ability to deploy and manage, security point products in a meaningful way to gather the right information, right? That's a big reason why keeping on a staff that can maintain these infrastructures locally is just becoming less viable on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's great. Jesse, anything to add?
No, I wanted to ask Mac a question if you could elaborate a little bit, because some of these reasons to move to the cloud are very easy to understand, the elasticity, the high availability, that kind of stuff. But Mac, one of the things that people used to say, we don't want to move to the cloud because there's less security there. And given what you just talked about in terms of the negative, unemployment, the difficulty in finding skills, that actually has been something that's been significantly improved upon in cloud environments. Is that something you could address a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so that was a softball. That wasn't even planned. No, I think yeah. No, I mean it's actually kind of why we kind of entered into the cybersecurity space, because we have a lot of customers and partners asking for all of these things in tandem. And what's kind of funny is I think what your comment that you're talking about was an objection I ran into far more frequently, 5+ years ago. As things evolved, I mean, the guys that were saying that, the cloud is less secure and it was kind of the unknown were the same guys that were housing servers, in open, unlocked closets in their building or even bathrooms. So that concern has, I would say, gone down in a lot of organizations because of the compliance rigor that a lot of myself and peers have to go through to even be a viable player in the cloud space. I have to maintain ISO 27001. I have to prove, all the physical security elements, for access to the environment. I have to maintain, SOC 2, Type 2, and all these, different checkboxes that for a customer to do on their own, whether they're regulated or not, would be super, super costly just to have a staff with, a title of, VP of compliance and whatever, right? So I don't hear that a whole lot as much anymore, but when we're talking about cloud and outsourcing your infrastructure, you do have to take into account the implications on the attack surface, right? So if you're moving your infrastructure from your location now, you're extending to a new environment, and there's a new attack surface and new threat landscape. So we got into the advisory services game with security and even offered SOC services because people kept asking us to kind of help them along that path as part of the infrastructure move. So right now they're going hand in hand more than anything else for that reason.
Mhm.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, that was a softball, Jesse. Can we can we move on to the next slide, Jordan? So I guess I'll start this slide. This was a conversation I had about 25 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago with an organization that is interested in engaging us for some assistance in cloud migration. And I'll tie it back to cloud readiness in just a minute, but this is a move to 365 from an aging legacy on-prem Exchange environment. And so the client, who shall go, we won't name them, was pressing next, right? And migration wizards and whatnot, and got through about 3 or 4 rounds and then said, okay, we haven't put a whole lot of thought into this. And I say this tongue in cheek. Let's backtrack a little bit and think about what our plan is, right? To migrate 650 users from on-prem Exchange to 365. And so my point is, you should always assess before you jump in with both feet, to cloud. So we want to go through a cloud readiness assessment. We want to review the business information model, the organization model, the requirements. Does an organization want employees to work from anywhere? Is a key application moving to SaaS? So they're being forced in that decision. We talked about seasonal employees that need to access the platforms quickly. So I think once you are able to identify the business drivers or organizational drivers, and we've got that pegged, then there's a determination we can make as far as what should stay on-prem, what can move into cloud, from a performance, from a feasibility perspective, what's the end user experience going to be like? Is it going to be disruptive? Is it not? And then generally there is a mix of IaaS and SaaS-based requirements. Should you move to public, private, or hybrid? Let's kind of vet that out. So, and it's also really important in our mind, and Mac, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, to rationalize and optimize what's in place currently versus taking this lift and shift approach. Because all of a sudden, if you take lift and shift, you could have budget overruns, garbage in, garbage out. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the importance of doing your diligence and rationalizing and optimizing before you move.
Ooh, big topic. So on the optimization side, I think that there's a couple different ways to look at this. If you are wanting to, for whatever reason, go to like an AWS or an Azure or Google Cloud, this item is far more important, primarily with how their billing model works. So if you don't do these items, you are in store for lots of surprises. And there's an app modernization component to it that you really have to get through. So there's definitely some project work involved. As a VMware hosting provider, my approach to this is slightly different in that there is some optimization components to it, but our value prop is a little bit more along the lines of a static billing model, because what you have, you can move pretty simply into my environment if you are a VMware shop today. And so that is a lot of times a first step, to moving to a hosted environment, because the tool sets are the same and you don't necessarily have to change a whole lot on the existing workloads. However, there are absolutely workloads that do not work in that model all that well. So we actually we see a lot of this on the planning on the disaster recovery side. So if you leverage like backup and disaster recovery testing and planning to really kind of flesh out some of these, problem children, in the application stack, it's a good way to not only protect your business, have some business continuity components in place, and then grow accustomed to what that experience might be, and quite honestly, get some good ideas on how to mitigate those in the event of a failover. So two completely different models. Both of them have merit, and I would even say a lot of what we're seeing is multi-cloud environments. So I've got organizations with pretty static workloads running on my side, and they might have the more elastic, bursty applications running in the hyperscalers, your AWSs and Azures, for kind of that happy medium, because my billing is flat rate and they need more flex. So they're leveraging AWS for something like that. Is that in line with what you're looking for?
It is. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that. And just, one last point here, we mentioned it earlier, but vet out the CSP, right? I mean, we've seen, hopping from one provider to another that's had to take place because the cloud service provider that an organization's moved to originally, it no longer supported them, right? From a business perspective, a regulatory and compliance standpoint, maybe it was even, features and functionality. So Mac, it was I think, spot on, and the other thing too, don't lock yourselves into enterprise agreements and make commits for reserve instances and things like that if you want, flexibility as you head into the future. So keep it more flexible. Okay, Jordan, we can move on. So don't go it alone either. Especially if it's an initiative that your internal team is not entirely comfortable with or doesn't have experience. There are partners that have processes in place, methodologies, plans, people, tools, and perform these types of migrations once a readiness assessment is done on a weekly or monthly basis. And this is another conversation that came up this morning with a client I mentioned earlier. Dip your toe in too. Let's create a plan that has proof of concept, a pilot group, test, and then ultimately migrate on a larger scale. Because I think if you migrate in one fell swoop, you may be asking for some challenges. And then lastly, have a rollback plan and criterion triggers where you can back out if the migration is not going according to plan. So Jesse, Mac, any thoughts here?
I would just add some color as to the why. If you look at a provider in our shoes, my team is doing migration of a lot of different environments at the scale of hundreds or even thousands of workloads monthly. So reframing that both internally as you're, selling the concept of leveraging outside resources, it is a common action for groups like ours versus an IT staff that sees one environment all days, every day, versus someone who gets a lot of context from different, best practices from other organizations. It should kind of grease the skids a little bit on a willingness to come out of pocket a bit for some consulting help, because it makes a huge difference.
Yep. Good point. Okay. Gordon, if you can advance us, please. So, and Jesse, maybe after I'm done, chatting a little bit about optimization and support. I know this is something that's near and dear to you. We had an aside on this the other day. So, once an organization does move, you really shouldn't take a set it and forget it approach, but that does happen quite a bit. So don't forget to continuously monitor, right, for utilization, for patterns, for performance, so that the overall environment can be optimized and ultimately costs can be contained. And then also, excuse me, ensure that you have the right resources and partners to support the environment on an ongoing basis. I mean, Jesse, we've seen lots of instances in the market where there's cost overruns, right? I mean, budgets are blown out of the water, and people are put in uncomfortable positions because there's a lot greater spend than anticipated. So your thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I mean, there's a right way to spin down. There's a right way to spin up your compute for testing, for modeling, for whatever the business needs are, and you want to make that easy for your engineering team or your development team or whatever to go ahead and do that. But those costs stay in motion, right? Unless you've got a cloud optimization tool that you're using, or a process to make sure that you're monitoring what you've spun up and that you spin it back down and you turn it off, the meter keeps running. And so that kind of the ease and the flexibility of the cloud is offset by oops, where'd that expense come from? And I thought I took care of that. There's a right way to turn off those resources, and you got to make sure that you've got a process to do that. And that's where leveraging a partner can help make sure that we're doing that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jordan, if you want to move us ahead, so it's simply a graphical representation of what we've been talking about specifically over the last 3 slides, and so some of you might roll your eyes when I say this, but keep in mind your cloud strategy is a journey and not a destination. You hear that from me and our team quite a bit, whether it's security, whether it's cloud related, and so the idea of assessing, piloting, migrating, at least the pilot group, or coming up with that plan, going whole hog with a migration, leveraging and harnessing scale, security, compliance, monitoring and optimizing, and then running through that process again over time, I think is going to ensure that your strategy of moving and then leveraging and harnessing the power of the cloud is going to be a successful one. And we will share this deck with everyone that's attending. So if you want to have a look at it later and then reach out to us with questions, let us know. All right, well, let's move on to something else that's near and dear to our heart, and that's security. Mac, you were touching on it earlier, and so the first step really is understanding your organization's responsibility, right, for security, and where that stops and where the cloud service provider picks up on the responsibilities, so that there aren't any glaring gaps or vulnerabilities or misses. And so as an example, infrastructure as a service typically requires the organization to provide more security than something like SaaS, which is a solution like Salesforce, where you may only need to focus on access to the application itself and securing the data that's within that application, like in the SaaS model, Salesforce, for example. In the case of an organization using a platform as a service and a provider, you may want to consider incorporating web application testing, right, as part of your ongoing pen testing or red teaming efforts to make sure things are secure. So Mac, I know you guys blur the lines between being cloud and then a managed security provider. So I'm sure you've got some thoughts here to weigh in on.
Yeah, I mean, it's all coming from demand. I mean, even if you go back to the last slide on that wheel, the request that we had just gotten year over year was, we want more visibility. We want to have access to a lot more data than we historically have had. So there's a large effort in tool sets, to make a lot of that content known. And if you go back down to the security slide, to your point, hitting up all through this when we're talking about, even backup. So we're talking about data protection. If you're looking at, the cybersecurity framework, like a CIS or NIST cybersecurity framework, you have data protection under the, would you call it, recover category. If you move that back, you've got respond, detect, protect. and identify. So if you're looking at that framework, you're coming into assessing this migration, in that context. And so we're kind of being drug into all these new categories and ultimately, reflected in an acquisition for us of buying an MSSP. So we could address a lot of those concerns a lot more friendly to our shared infrastructure environment. So it definitely was a big play for us, but you can't have one conversation without the other for sure.
Jesse, anything on security before we move on? Are we okay?
I think you're okay. Let's move on.
All right. So in regard to security, there's a whole host of things that you can do to secure the environment. And I think to Mac's point, organizations are getting their arms around what needs to happen. Whereas, 5-6 years ago, it was a little bit of a mystery, right? So extending tools to cloud-based assets. So your security information event management platform, endpoint detection and response, incorporating vulnerability scanning, network traffic analysis. When you go through your red teaming exercises, and do your penetration testing, make sure that you extend all those tools, because you are extending your perimeter, and to Mac's point, your attack surface as you leverage third parties. You're certainly incorporating tools like multi-factor authentication and cloud access service broker. I mean, that should be a given. I know that most organizations, if they want cybersecurity insurance, have to demonstrate the ability to validate they're using something like MFA. Implement ID management and SSO for software as a service applications. Continue to raise the security consciousness of the user base so that credentials aren't hijacked. And then don't make any assumptions, right? As you're vetting out cloud service providers, ask the hard questions. And then as contracts come up for renewal, or if you're thinking about migrating to another provider, make sure you go through the appropriate diligence. Mac, you just popped on again. Any points here?
Tons. Sorry. No, I say that this is kind of a also relevant, right? So this space, cybersecurity space, whether it's done internally or you're sourcing it or whatever you do with it, is just changing at such a rapid rate. In one humongous driver here is how they're evaluating risk, and that's a change is being forced upon the community in that 2 to 5 years ago, an organization could go out and sign up for cyber liability insurance pretty inexpensively, and they were told to just pay the ransom. Well, once ransom payments exceeded the premiums by double or more, the cyber insurance companies changed their model to where to even be insurable, you have to check some of these boxes on this screen. And even if you are insurable, which in all likelihood you aren't, without making some extra steps, then your rates are going to double, triple, quadruple. And there's a few exceptions that don't have a whole lot of, a high bar of, getting the insurance, but they limit what they pay out. And so organizations that historically had just decided to transfer risk now have to look at different strategies, whether that's accepting it, avoiding it, or actually mitigating it. So this space is actually pretty exciting and moving at a extremely fast pace, hard to keep up with, but that's why we're all here.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Jordan, we can move on. So this is also probably top of mind for you guys. We're hearing it quite a bit in the field, and it's just the topic of third-party vendor risk management. There's a lot of headlines, especially in the last few years, about supply chain attack, and ignorance isn't you can't use that as an excuse, right? If you're going to be breached, and so having a process in place, a checklist. I mean, there's quite a few that are available online. I think we probably share some. The government, I think CISA has a really good risk management questionnaire. But just working through those questions so you're covered from this standpoint, because if you don't do the diligence and you are breached, what does that mean, right? From a reputational and brand perspective, what's the legality around it, right? Do you get dragged into an upstream or downstream lawsuit? So I'm not trying to fearmonger here, but certainly it needs to be part of the process as you vet out a CSP. So Mac, are you seeing that more and more as folks vet you guys out?
Oh, absolutely. We're getting lots and lots of red lines on those agreements. So the consulting side is very important, helping them understand. It's been more of a layered approach, but yeah, organizations are asking for us to take on an unbelievable amount of liability these days, more so than I think we want to in most cases. But
yeah, I can imagine. Jesse, any points, or should we move on?
I think the thing here is just be planful, right? You can view the conversations with Mac or other CSPs as contentious, or you can look at it more as let's make sure that we're understanding what we're going to do in a breach, when data is stolen, what does compliance mean for us, right? If we're just checking the box and some procurement process, we're really not going to be any better off, right? It's when we're approaching in terms of we're really trying to improve our security and make sure that we've got the processes that go, hey, we've tested it, by the way. We know that if we have a breach, we know if we have a recovery situation because of a ransomware attack, we can sever that, recover from, we'll be back in motion with, the right recovery time and the right recovery period that we've planned for. But if you're not planful in these conversations with Mac or us or other third parties about what you can expect, and then make sure that you prove it and then test it so that we have the confidence to do that. That's what gives the business the continuity that we need as a team. Is that right?
Yeah, spot on. Thanks. All right, Jordan, I think we've got one or two more slides left. And so we hit on cloud and compliance and regulation and governance. And so I'm not going to read all these off. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, and I think you guys get the gist. But it goes back to understanding as an organization what you need to be doing from a governance and regulatory compliance perspective. I think once that's been figured out, then the right CSP can be selected. And some of that selection criteria or process has got to dovetail back into GRC. So if you're a multinational, right, and there's an expectation on ISO 27001 because NIST cybersecurity framework or 800-171 or 53 isn't as well known in other countries that doing business, that might dictate where you're going, right? If you want to continue to maintain messaging around we're ITIL aligned, that's something important to us. Then we want to make sure that we're also aligned to the right cloud service partners so that we can continue to tell that story. So there's a whole host of examples, right? If you're in retail, making sure PCI is covered. If you're in healthcare, HIPAA. If it's you're in the defense industry base, making sure you're aligned with CMMC and DFARS and ITARs. So there's all those business requirements that would go into who you might potentially partner with. Okay. So last one before we talk a little bit about a case study, and we'll end on that, assuming there aren't any questions. Calling out missteps, and some of these are common. We see them a fair amount. Just having this false sense of security that there is cybersecurity in what you're purchasing. No pun intended. Certainly lack of integration with security tools, because that could create blind spots. So if you go and make a major investment with a third party, and maybe you're using a managed security provider, maybe you've spun something up internally, making sure that there's APIs and integration so that you can ingest data and get that 360-degree visibility within, not only what's sitting behind four walls, but also within the cloud. Shadow IT still comes up a fair amount. I mean, it's very easy for a user to go and purchase software as a service and spin up and leverage it in their day-to-day. So ensuring that there's policies and procedures in place, and centralized decision making, so that you don't run into problems with that. Focusing on the end user experience. Is it ubiquitous, whether they're in the office, at the coffee shop, or at home? So really running through a testing plan. And I know in a lot of cases, organizations go into the vetting process wanting to understand if moving to the cloud is a silver bullet as it relates to cloud reduction or cost reduction. And in a lot of cases, it won't be, right? I mean, there's value add. And so I wouldn't anticipate it always, driving cost out. And then, we've hit on, the migration plan, and Mac called out those problem childs as it relates to apps and systems that may not be cloud friendly. And the last comment I'll make is, connectivity becomes even more important, right? Do you have primary, backup, tertiary, right? Wherever folks are accessing cloud, assets. Do you have direct connections in that will bolster performance and security? So just rethinking how things are being done on the connectivity front is also going to be important. So Mac, Jesse, anything else here before we jump into the case study?
Nothing major. I've got a story about each one of these bullets, though, if you're interested at some point.
Well, maybe you can think on one, and after we talk about the case study, we can end it with a war story. Jordan, if you want to move ahead one. So this one's recent, and I like it because the organization was able to harness power of the cloud, right? Scale, security, and compliance very, very quickly. So it's a global company focused on defense and military sector. They're headquartered outside of the US, and they're in 47, 48 different countries. So you're struggling to ensure that they were meeting regulatory and compliance demands of various countries and regions in which they were operating. And so they needed an environment that could not only scale over time. Their US presence was modest, but growing relatively quickly. They needed an environment that could be air gapped from the rest of the commercial business as it relates to their US-based assets. They wanted a third-party MSP to take care of the migration and the ongoing support. So that expertise needed to be there. And just to check all the boxes from a Department of Defense perspective, they needed to hit on that. And so they settled on moving to Microsoft Azure GCC High. They also did the same from a 365 licensing perspective. And so instantly that solved a lot of problems for this particular organization. And so I like that one as a case study. Jesse, Mac, any comments on this one? Nope. Okay.
For me.
I think that is the end of the presentation. So I haven't checked to see if we have any questions or comments. Feel free to do so now. But Mac, Jesse, any closing comments on cloud in general as we wait to see if we get any questions and adjourn?
Mac, I think a couple of those war stories might be helpful, right? Because they
Yeah.
paint a picture, you know, in real time of, you know, what's happening, what have we done here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you actually an interesting one, and you'll have to unwind it a little bit, but um, small organization, you know, let's call it 15 servers, had planned on, you know, migrating to a hosted environment and had started the process. Typically the way that we would do it is through a replica, right? So the same theory as a replication for disaster recovery purposes is essentially how we do migration, right? So it gives us the opportunity to test and all that. Well, on the security front, they actually had a ransomware event that locked up all of their local infrastructure. Fortunately, they had already started the process of replicating, and we were able to get them back up, you know, up and running, and quite honestly, just a little bit faster than we had expected from a migration standpoint. But through that process, they recognized issues. And if you go back to that previous slide, not only in the network, but in the security side and how they were planning and what kind of plan they had in place to secure the environment, and then ultimately what apps are going to run and how they're going to run, because we expedited the testing program since they couldn't access their production environment. So as you can see, just kind of how our business is evolving, we are having to have conversations not only about the connectivity, but the cloud and the security all in one. And there's because they do all talk together. So all of those internal resources that have to be involved in those conversations probably ought to get together as part of any kind of plan for cloud migrations, of course.
Yeah.
Great.
One that pops in my mind is really around that false sense of cybersecurity, right? You know, that hey, I bought the tools, right? I've got clients also that, you know, I bought all the tools, and how come we still had this attack? Well, you don't, you know, this particular client, you know, just didn't have the internal resources or processes to monitor the alerts, to monitor the behaviors and the activities, didn't hire a third party to do it, and was wondering why they didn't automatically be told there's a problem that they had to resolve. It goes back to some of the planning for what you want to accomplish out of it. And do you have the right steps and maturity to be able to accommodate what you're trying to do, that Matt talked about earlier today as well?
Yeah. Well, good stuff, guys. So Jordan, I'm looking in chat, and we don't have any questions. I'll just reiterate one more time. You know, if you have any after the fact, because you want to do one-on-one, you know, Q&A, you know, certainly reach out to us, reach out to your appropriate account manager, partner manager, and we're happy to address any lingering questions. As always, we really appreciate you spending time with us. We'll have another webinar teed up about a quarter from now, and we're looking forward to having you guys come and join us again. So Mac, Jesse, thanks for being panelists with me. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. And let's see, I guess we got your contact information in the chat notes there, right?
Yeah, Steve. Yes, we do. So,
Good.
all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.